Hi guys, All Boy here, welcome to the channel. This is the first video that I'm doing in the series where I'm going to be looking at the mystery religions and the mythologies which came out of the Black Sea region and the Mediterranean in the late Bronze Age, and comparing the motifs that we find there with the Irish mythologies and the British mythologies. So to start off, to give a little bit of context and an introduction, we are going to be looking at an old myth, an old legend, which relates to how Britain was founded. And we're going to be looking at the legend of Brutus of Troy. So Brutus of Troy is a legendary descendant of the Trojan hero Aeneas. And in the Historia Britonum, which is usually accredited to be a work of Nennius, we find this myth. This was written in around about 800 AD. We also have an account of it in Historia Regum Britannia by Geoffrey of Monmouth in the around about the 1100s AD. And what's interesting about this is in books up until around about World War II time, this is written about almost as if it's just accepted kind of fact, really. So even John Milton writes about it in his History of Britain. And I think the most recent book that I read which mentions it was a book about the life of a Welsh Prime Minister. It was written by an MP, a dedication to his life. And in the introduction they have a history of Britain, and it also mentions it as well. And this was written in around about 1916, I believe. It was the life of George Lloyd, I believe the book was called, if memory serves. So the two accounts, I'm just going to read you a brief synopsis. I don't want to go into too much detail on this, really. It's just an introduction. So we're going to look at the Historia Britonum, and I'm just going to give you a synopsis of how the story is told there, and then how it is told in the Historia Regum Britannia by Geoffrey of Monmouth. Okay, so supposedly following Roman sources such as Livy and Virgil, the Historia tells how Aeneas settled in Italy after the Trojan War, and how his son Ascanius founded Alba Longa, one of the precursors of Rome. Ascanius married and his wife became pregnant. A magician was asked to predict the child's future and said it would be a boy and that it would be the bravest and most beloved in Italy. Enraged, Ascanius had the magician put to death, and the mother died in childbirth. The boy, named Brutus, later accidentally killed his father with an arrow and was banished from Italy. After wandering amongst the islands of the Tyrrhenian Sea and through Gaul, where he founded the city of Tours, Brutus eventually came to Britain, named it after himself, and filled it with his descendants. His reign is synchronised to the time the high priest Eli was judging Israel. So that's how it appears in Historia Britonum. It's slightly different in Historia Regum Britannia. So in this version, Brutus is explicitly the grandson rather than the son of Ascanius. His father is Ascanius' son, Silvius. The magician who predicts great things for the unborn Brutus also foretells he will kill both his parents. He does so in the same manner described in the Historia Britonum and is banished. Travelling to Greece, he discovers a group of Trojans enslaved there. He becomes their leader, and after a series of battles, they defeat the Greek king Pandrasus by attacking his camp at night after capturing the guards. He takes him hostage and forces him to let his people go. He is given Pandrasus' daughter Ignoge or Inogen in marriage, and ships and provisions for the voyage, and sets sail. The Trojans land on a deserted island and discover an abandoned temple to Diana. After performing the appropriate ritual, Brutus falls asleep in front of the goddess's statue and is given a vision of the land where he is destined to settle, an island in the Western Ocean inhabited only by a few giants. After some adventures in North Africa and a close encounter with the Sirens, Brutus discovers another group of exiled Trojans living on the shores of the Tyrrhenian Sea, led by the prodigious warrior Corineus. In Gaul, Corineus provokes a war with Gutharius Pictus, king of Aquitaine, after hunting in the king's forests without permission. Brutus' nephew Tyrannus dies in the fighting, and the city of Tours is founded where he is buried. The Trojans win most of their battles, but are conscious that the Gauls have the advantage of numbers, so go back to their ships and sail for Britain, then called Albion. They land on Tertentium Miletus, or the seacoast of Totnes. They meet the giant descendants of Alebion and defeat them. Brutus renames the island after himself and becomes its first king. Corineus becomes a ruler of Cornwall, which is named after him, and then when they reach the River Thames, he calls it New Troia Nova, or New Troy, and the name is in time corrupted to Trinovantum and is later called London. Now, when Caesar came to England, there was a tribe called the Trinovantes who were there as well. So the name does survive until Caesar's time. Okay, so that's just a brief synopsis of how the legend appears. You also have the Brutus Stone, which you can go and visit in London. There's not really much to see. Doesn't look too impressive, if I'm honest. No offence to anyone there. But what else interests me is how Milton actually writes about this as well. Now, Milton, he was a very, 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 very intelligent guy. So he spoke English, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, French, Spanish, Italian, Old English, Dutch, Aramaic and Syriac. He obviously was into poetry. You'll have heard of Paradise Lost. And he had an interest in history, a big interest. And he was actually a civil servant. He was the Secretary of Foreign Tongues at one time, so that's interesting. He was obviously a very educated guy. So he had an interest in actually trying to find out whether this legend was real or not. So he looked into it and he writes about it in his book, The History of Britain, which was written in 1670. So here's what John Milton has to say about the legend. Consultation had Brutus taken with him Geryon, his diviner, and 12 of the Antientest, with wonted ceremonies before the inward shrine of the goddess, in verse, as it seems the manner was, utters his request. Goddess of shades and huntress, who at will walkest on the rolling sphere, and through the deep, on thy third reign, the earth, look now, and tell what land, what seat of rest thou bidst me seek, what certain seat where I may worship thee, for I with temples vowed and virgin choirs. To whom, sleeping before the altar, Diana in a vision that night thus answered, Brutus, far to the west in the ocean wide, beyond the realm of Gaul, there a land lies, sea-girt, where giants dwelt of old. Now void it fits thy people, thither bend thy course, there thou shalt find a lasting seat. There to thy sons another Troy shall rise, and kings be born of thee, whose dreaded might shall awe the world and conquer nations bold. Milton then carries on. These verses were originally in Greek and were put into Latin, saith Verinius, by Gildus, a British poet whom he supposes to have lived under the Roman Emperor Claudius, which, if granted true, adds much to the antiquity of this fable, and indeed the Latin verses are much better than for the age of Geoffrey ap Arthur, who's Geoffrey of Monmouth. Unless, perhaps, Joseph of Exeter, whom was the only smooth poet of those times, befriended him. In this answer, Diana overshot her oracle, thus ending, that to the race of brute, kings of this island, the whole earth shall be subject. Okay, so he is referencing a original Greek recording of this oracle, and I've actually found the Latin translation, so you can all look at it. Maybe you can I'm not an expert in Latin at all, so I can't vouch for the translation, maybe somebody who has a better knowledge of Latin can validate that translation. But I'm really, really interested in finding this original Greek source. So if anybody out there can find it, I'm not really academically inclined. I've had a look on the internet, but I'm struggling to pull it up. But if anyone's out there who can find it, so it's the oracle that Brutus receives from the Temple of Diana. If anybody can find that, please reach out to me. It'd be a great help. See if we can validate the Greek translation. So, if we were to look at this from an evidence point of view, is there anything to suggest that these migrations from the Mediterranean happened? What would we expect to see? We would expect to see the tools that they used, similarities in the tools, similarities in the religious practices, stuff like that. So I want to just bring your attention to some of the Iron Age chariots which have been uncovered in Yorkshire. So this is from archaeology.co.uk, and it's an Iron Age chariot which was found early 2017. So I'm going to read it for you now. Excavating a square barrow cemetery at Pocklington, which is in Yorkshire, near York. Excavation of the Pocklington chariot burial underway in February 2017. This is the first chariot burial to be found in 200 years that include the horses. The square barrow containing the burial was found during work on the roadside verge in the concluding phase of excavations. Although the barrow ditch continued under the modern road, the entirety of the burial lay within the excavated area. So you've got remnants of the chariot wheels, you've got the rider, you've got the remains of the horses. So these are very interesting finds. So the estimated age range are from between 500 and 100 BC. And the warrior man was placed in a crouched position in the cart of the chariot along with a bronze shield and a decorated brooch. So this is from a second excavation which was done in January 2019. And this is what they have to say about it. Burials of this form are associated with a particular Iron Age culture known as the Arras tradition, after a cemetery excavated in the early 19th century. The phenomenon first appears in the late 5th century BC and remains distinctive down to the 1st century BC. In Britain, such burials are concentrated in eastern Yorkshire, but they closely resemble funerary rites practiced in parts of northern France. Very interesting. Suggesting a connection of some kind between the two regions. So we've got a connection suggested between the northern France and Britain here. Traditionally, the rapid appearance of this new mode of commemoration is linked to invaders settling in Yorkshire. Previous Iron Age cemeteries in the region containing dismantled chariots or carts have been found up in the low chalk hills forming the Yorkshire wolds. However, Pocklington lies in the shadow of the escarpment at the junction between the uplands and the Vale of York. And then it says here, during the course of excavations at Pocklington, 74 square barrows were discovered, making it the largest scale investigation of such a site for 30 years. So it's obviously quite a significant find here, really. Now, what else is interesting is this area where they were found was inhabited in pre-Roman times by the Brigantes tribe. And they were called the Brigantes because they derived their name from Brigantia, which was the goddess that they worshipped. So Brigantia, also known as Brigid, was syncretized as Minerva when the Romans came over. And there's some Roman era shrines and little figurines which are dedicated to her. And you can actually see one of them. She's got the Gorgon's head on her chest. So, according to the Encyclopedia of Indo-European Culture, Brigantia translates to the High One. So in Old Irish it's Brigid, in Old British Brigantia, and in Old High German Burgund. The derivation is clearly from Berg, which is high, hill, mountain, The Celtic goddess is attested in both Britain and Ireland, because interestingly on the southeast coast of Ireland you also have the Brigantes, they were also there. Also the British and early Irish tribal names Brigantes, of whom Brigantia would have been the titular deity. In the Roman interpretation of Celtic deities, Brigantia is equated with Minerva, and hence is seen as a patron of the crafts, especially poetic, or those pertaining to foretelling the future, while the Irish source is also associated with crop fertility. Although recorded in pagan contexts in the early Irish literature, characteristics of the pagan Brigid are also recovered after her Christianisation into Saint Brigid, a 6th century Leinster saint whose sacred fire at Kildare suggests other rituals pertaining to the goddess. St Brigid was also a patron of agricultural fertility, and her feast day fell on the Irish festival of Imbolc, the summer solstice. So there you go, very interesting. Now, we also have altars that have been dedicated in Roman times to Brigantia. I'm just going to read one of them out to you. I'm going to flash it up on the screen. Now, this is actually, I can't believe it, this altar that was found has actually now been lost. So we've only got, we're going off a record of, you know, when it was first discovered. They wrote it down and everything. I can't believe that people can lose something like this. That's pretty insane to me. But anyway, the translation here refers to her as the goddess nymph. So this offering to the goddess nymph Brigantia, which he had vowed for the welfare and safety of our Lord, the invincible emperor, Marcus Aurelius Severus Antoninus Pius Felix Augustus, and of his whole divine house, Marcus Corsius Nigrinus, procurator of our emperor and most devoted to his divinity and majesty, gladly, willing and deservedly fulfilled. So this translation is from romaninscriptionsofbritain.org, so you can go and check that out for yourself if you want to have a look. And interestingly enough, there is a church in Cumbria, which is the Church of St Brigid, and I went to check it out because there's a very interesting font inside. Actually, it has a runic cipher on the front, and it has very unusual carvings on the font for what is described as a Christian font. So you have loads of grapevines. There's a guy kind of eating the grapes. He looks very jolly. You also have some Greek mythical creatures on there, an amphisbaena, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is kind of like a two-headed mythical creature. And there's also the church that's there presently is a renovated version of the Norman church that was built on the site. Now, before that, there was an Anglo-Saxon church. And then even before the Anglo-Saxon church, we have a record of a wooden church that was built there. So these artefacts, some people believe they were actually from the earlier incarnations of the church that were carried over into the Norman incarnation. Now, what I found interesting, just on the window ledge, there's just a broken piece of a carving that's just sat there. No description, no nothing. But when you look at it, there's a picture of a woman with a horned crown holding a cornucopia. Is that a reference to Brigantia? I can't say. I'm not an expert, but I'll put the image on screen. You can have a look for yourself. It's certainly interesting anyway. Anyway, moving on. Is there any other evidence that supports a similarity in weaponry and tools? So I'm just going to play a video here, which is just going to show a Bronze Age spear head, which was actually recovered from the River Thames, London. So when you look at it, it's incredible. The craftsmanship's incredible when you think about how long ago it was and the tools they had to work with. That certainly made some incredible looking weaponry. So there's a British spearhead, a British sword, and two British Bronze Age axes there. So I'm going to run the video now, and you can check it out. Late Bronze Age spearhead, found in London, from the Britons Short dagger of Italian from the late Bronze Age. Second from the right's a British Bronze Age, late Bronze Age bronze sword. And the one next to it on the right is German. All late Bronze Age. Some Bronze Age axe heads here too. The one in the centre there is from County Mayo. And then you've got some flint arrowheads and axes. Look at that British spearhead, isn't that amazing? So, thanks for watching. I just wanted to give a little bit of background because some of you might not be aware about this this legend, this mythology about the founding of England and Brutus being a descendant of Troy and bringing the Britons over to the island. It's certainly interesting. I'm not saying it's true or anything like that. I'm merely just putting it out there just so you're aware of it, that this mythology sort of exists, and it's almost central to really the mythology of the Britons. So I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to be looking at Geoffrey of Monmouth's Vita Merlini, the life of Merlin. That's where we're starting. And let me tell you from the beginning, it's very interesting. Geoffrey of Monmouth had definitely had a knowledge of the Greek works, you know, Homer, things like that, Ovid, because right from the get-go, the opening paragraph, he's already referencing them. So he's aware of these works, and it's quite interwoven into his work really, and it's written in hexameter format as well, so that's interesting. So I hope you enjoyed it. I'm aiming to get the next video out soon. I started trying to do the whole thing and it was just too much, and I thought it's gonna be best to break it down into small digestible chunks. So I hope that format works better for you. And disclaimer, I'm not an expert, I'm just an enthusiast. My ultimate goal is to train in bardism. I'm learning the Welsh language right now, and I want to take the bardic tradition back to Cumbria. Basically, I want to establish that bardic tradition, tell the mythologies of Britain, basically, in the history. So that's my aim. That's where I come from. But as I've been studying these things, I've noticed the similarities with Europe, mainland Europe, and the Mediterranean and things. So this is a fantastic opportunity for me to learn. I'm by no means an expert in the Greek texts at all. So I'm mainly doing this as a communal thing. I'll bring you the information that I can find and that I'm aware of from the Celtic sources, the Irish and British annals and mythologies, and hopefully together with some help from some of you guys who are more expert in the Greek and the Roman and the Latin and things like that, the Latin languages and the Greek languages and those works. Hopefully we can piece it together. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next one. Cheers.